The biting wind howled through the frozen expanse, and the vast Arctic wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction. With nothing but snow and silence surrounding me, this was the ultimate test of survival. I had chosen to spend 3 days in a self-built Arctic survival shelter, relying on nothing but basic tools, my instincts, and sheer determination. It wasn't just an adventure. It was a battle against nature's harshest elements. The journey began with a trek into the icy wilderness, every step crunching under my boots as the cold gnawed at my fingers. The sun was weak, barely warming the horizon, and the nights promised to be long and unforgiving. My shelter, crafted from snow, ice, and a few gathered materials, was far from perfect, but it was my only refuge. Each day brought new challenges, securing firewood, melting snow for water, and keeping the shelter intact against the relentless Arctic winds. By the second day, I had also taken on a unique challenge: blacksmithing in the wild. Using makeshift tools and a small fire, I attempted to forge something useful, an experiment born out of necessity and curiosity. But as the Arctic nights grew colder, I soon realized survival wasn't just about skill, it was about willpower. As the second night fell, the temperature dropped even further, and the Arctic silence grew heavier, broken only by the occasional crack of ice shifting in the distance. My shelter felt smaller, almost suffocating, as I huddled close to the fire. The flames flickered weakly, fighting to stay alive against the biting cold. My fingers, stiff from hours of labor and exposure, barely managed to grip the small tools I had fashioned earlier in the day. Blacksmithing in these conditions was more difficult than I had imagined. The fire needed constant attention, and the limited materials I had scavenged forced me to get creative. A few scrap pieces of metal I carried in my pack became my focus. The goal was simple: forge a makeshift hook that could help with gathering supplies or even fishing if the opportunity arose. Each strike of the makeshift hammer echoed in the stillness, a reminder of how alone I was. The isolation was beginning to weigh on me. I couldn't help but think about the unpredictability of this environment. What if the shelter gave way? What if the fire died completely? The Arctic was indifferent to my struggle. The snowstorm I had been warned about loomed on the horizon, creeping closer with each passing hour. I decided to prepare for the worst, but a sense of unease lingered. This was no longer just a test of survival. It felt as though the Arctic itself was testing me, pushing me to my limits. The snowstorm arrived faster than I had anticipated. By the time I noticed the first flakes swirling wildly in the air, it was too late to make significant adjustments to my shelter. The wind roared outside, a deafening sound that made me feel as if the Arctic itself was trying to tear through my fragile refuge. The fire sputtered and danced in its stone-lined pit, threatening to go out entirely with each gust that managed to slip through the cracks. My hands moved quickly, reinforcing the walls with more packed snow and using my meager supply of branches to brace the structure. Every movement was deliberate, but exhaustion was catching up. Days without proper sleep, the relentless cold, and the mental strain of being alone in such an unforgiving environment were taking their toll. The hook I had forged earlier hung uselessly near the entrance, reminding me of the tasks I had planned for the next day, tasks I might not be able to complete if the storm grew worse. Every instinct screamed to conserve energy, but the shelter wouldn't hold on its own. The night stretched endlessly, the storm's fury showing no sign of relenting. In the chaos, another worry gnawed at me: food. My supplies were dwindling faster than expected, and the storm would make gathering or hunting impossible. Each problem felt like a piece of a larger puzzle, one I wasn't sure I could solve. The Arctic wasn't just testing me anymore, it felt like it was challenging my very existence. The storm raged through the night, relentless and unforgiving. Inside the shelter, I could feel the walls trembling under the weight of the howling winds and the heavy snow piling on top. Each creak and groan of the structure sent a wave of dread through me. I tried to stay calm, forcing myself to focus on the flickering flame that was now dangerously low. My firewood supply had dwindled to almost nothing, and the thought of the fire dying out entirely filled me with panic. I rummaged through my pack, hoping to find anything that could keep the fire going. A few scraps of dry cloth were all I had left, and I hesitated before tossing them into the flames. The warmth surged briefly, but it wasn't enough to banish the cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. Suddenly, a loud crack outside shattered the rhythm of the storm. My heart raced as I froze, straining to hear over the roar of the wind. Was it the sound of the shelter collapsing? Or something else entirely? The Arctic night was full of mysteries, and now, alone in the vast wilderness, I was confronted with a terrifying uncertainty. The walls shook again, harder this time, and I knew I had to act quickly. The storm wasn't letting up, and survival now felt like a race against time. Something out there, something unseen, was adding to the tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The crack outside wasn't the shelter collapsing, it was something else. As I peered out through the small opening I had left for ventilation, I saw movement against the blinding white of the storm. At first, I thought it was a trick of the swirling snow, but then it happened again. A shadow, faint but distinct, shifted through the storm. My breath caught. Could it be an animal? A predator drawn by the faint glow of my fire? My heart raced as I backed away from the entrance, clutching the only tool I had, the crude hook I had forged earlier. It wasn't much, but it was all I had for defense. The Arctic wasn't known for being merciful, and now the idea of surviving the storm seemed even more daunting. The shadow moved closer, stopping just outside the shelter. The wind howled louder, masking any sound it might have made. My mind raced with possibilities: a bear, a wolf, or something entirely unexpected. I tightened my grip on the hook, every muscle in my body tense as I prepared for whatever was about to happen. Then, suddenly, there was a loud thud against the side of the shelter. The entire structure shuddered, and a cascade of snow fell from the walls. Panic surged as I realized how fragile my refuge truly was. I couldn't stay inside much longer, not with the storm threatening to bury me and something unknown lurking just outside. The Arctic wasn't done with me yet. The shelter shook violently as another thud struck the side. I could feel the walls giving way, snow crumbling down around me. The fire sputtered in its final moments, leaving me in near darkness. My heart pounded as I realized I had no choice. I had to face whatever was out there. Gripping the hook tightly, I pushed my way through the narrow entrance, bracing against the storm's ferocity. As I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a wall, stealing the air from my lungs. The shadow was there, just a few feet away, shrouded in the swirling snow. It wasn't an animal, it was a person. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure if I was hallucinating from exhaustion. The figure stumbled toward me, collapsing into the snow. Without thinking, I rushed to their side, pulling them upright. It was another camper, their face pale and frostbitten, barely able to speak. They had been caught in the storm, their own shelter destroyed. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't alone in this fight. Together, we struggled back into my fragile shelter, reinforcing it as best we could. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to subside. Exhausted but alive, we emerged into the pale light of the Arctic morning. But as we surveyed the snow-covered expanse, something caught our eye. A strange set of tracks leading away from the shelter. They were too large to belong to either of us. Whatever had been out there wasn't gone. It was watching. As the strange tracks led into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Arctic had more to reveal, more challenges to throw at us. But in that moment, with the storm finally receding and daylight breaking over the snow-covered landscape, the immediate danger had passed. The other camper, now recovering from their ordeal, and I exchanged a quiet understanding. The wilderness had tested us both, and we had survived. We spent the next few hours securing the shelter and gathering what little supplies remained, knowing the storm's fury had taken much from us. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, we had managed to endure. It wasn't just about the tools or the skills we had. It was the will to keep going, to keep pushing forward, no matter how overwhelming the odds seemed. The tracks in the snow remained a haunting reminder of how unpredictable and wild the Arctic truly was, but we knew we had faced its worst. As we made our way back to civilization, there was no doubt in my mind that the experience had changed us both. The Arctic had tested our limits, but it also taught us the value of resilience and survival. In the end, that was the greatest lesson of all.